I'm talking about the definitive sentencing and immediate incarceration of Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro. He's been handed a 27-year prison term for leading a vast criminal conspiracy and a coup attempt, one that was explicitly designed to stop the peaceful transfer of power after the 2022 elections.
And this is just a seismic event. It's so consequential, not just because, you're prosecuting a former president, but because of the reactions. They are intensely polarized. For half of Brazil, this is it. This is the ultimate validation of the rule of law. But for the other half, and that includes millions of his loyal supporters, it's being framed as a, quote, rigged game, a politically motivated witch hunt that was orchestrated by the judiciary.
And that framing, I think, brings us right to the central question we really have to grapple with today. Should this conviction, this imprisonment of Bolsonaro, be seen primarily as a powerful signal of institutional strength, a demonstration of the ultimate victory of the rule of law in Brazil? Or do we have to view this as a dangerously polarizing act of judicial overreach, one that, while maybe legally sound, risks undermining democratic trust for millions of citizens who now feel their voice is being silenced by the courts?
And I'll be focusing on that difficult reality. The fact that this legal victory, while yes, it's undeniable, has failed spectacularly to secure political legitimacy for a massive portion of the electorate. And that, I think, is what leads to long-term democratic instability and fuels a resentment that's going to challenge the courts for years.
And I will argue that focusing too much on the electorate's emotional reaction risks diminishing the sheer gravity of the crime here. For me, the judicial outcome is definitive proof of the resilience and the capability of Brazilian democratic institutions to defend themselves, to impose accountability against the gravest internal threat they've faced in decades. For me, this is a watershed institutional moment. The conviction demonstrates, pretty unequivocally, that Brazil's democratic structures, the courts, the legislature, even the military command, they did not fracture under all that pressure. They functioned exactly as they were designed to. They defended the system against a planned, violent abolition of the democratic rule of law. We're not talking about simple corruption here.
This was a crime of immense scope, a criminal conspiracy designed to stop the constitutional transfer of power that included, explicit plans to assassinate the elected president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, his vice president Geraldo Alckmin, and the key Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes. The sheer scale of that plot, I think, makes the resulting conviction critical. Bolsonaro is the first former Brazilian president convicted specifically of attempting a coup. The fact that the top court has formally concluded that all appeals are exhausted, that confirms an essential principle: no leader is above the law. The system held up against intense scrutiny, domestic political maneuvering, and even against the former president's own desperate final acts before custody, like that widely reported attempt to break his ankle monitor with a soldering iron. That is accountability, pure and simple.
I see why you emphasize the formal conclusion of the case, but I come at it from a very different perspective, one that's about the long-term health of the democracy. While the court process is, yes, formally concluded, it has critically failed to achieve the necessary political legitimacy. And this failure, this is what breeds long-term instability, not the legal judgment itself. And the numbers, they confirm this political schism. Bolsonaro remains a key political figure. You look at the polls, they indicate he would still be a competitive candidate if he were allowed to run next year. Yet, through these legal decisions, his political future is constrained until at least 2033. The reaction from his base, where leaders like his son and other hardcore supporters characterize the proceedings as a rigged game, that resonates deeply with millions. We saw them appealing openly to former U.S. President Donald Trump for international intervention. And the core problem, the thing that bolsters these claims of political motivation, is the unavoidable appearance of a conflict of interest. The presiding judge for this entire process, Justice de Moraes, was himself a primary target in the alleged assassination plot. Now, regardless of Bolsonaro's guilt, which the court has established, that structural reality raises inevitable questions about judicial impartiality in the public mind. And those questions, they just won't disappear simply because the gavel has fallen.
That is a compelling point about the optics of Justiça de Moraes' dual role.
though I would frame its implication for the process's integrity a bit differently. The integrity of the judicial system, I think, is ultimately defined by its finality, by its ability to withstand intense pressure, both from within Brazil and from external political forces. The Supreme Court's decision is definitive. All legitimate appeals are exhausted. We shouldn't overlook that the system held up despite significant external interference. I mean, including rhetoric from figures like Donald Trump calling the trial a witch hunt, and even the U.S. imposing sanctions on Brazilian officials at various points. The ultimate result proves that the legal system is sovereign, it's robust, and it's capable of prosecuting a former president for trying to overthrow the constitutional order without, succumbing to political expediency or foreign pressure.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that legal finality equates to political resolution, especially when the actions of the defense make it so clear that the dispute is functionally not finished. It's merely transitioned from the trial phase into a new prolonged phase of, legal harassment that will continue to strain the judiciary. His defense lawyers immediately promised to keep filing requests for house arrest, citing Bolsonaro's poor health, even after the top court had already ruled against it. And think about what that means. Every subsequent ruling on his custody, his health, any new appeals, it's all going to be viewed through the same polarized lens that's already set. For his supporters, it's either another act of political persecution, or if they win some small concession, it's confirmation that the process was flawed all along.
The judiciary remains the focal point of all this political stress, precisely because the final legal word didn't convince the segment of the population that already distrusts it.
But if we're going to discuss the optics and the public perception of fairness, then we have to address the issue of the unique custody arrangement he's currently under. I know critics point to the seemingly privileged conditions. A 12 square meter room at the federal police headquarters, a private bathroom, air conditioning, a TV set. I would just counter that those who interpret this as a get out of jail free card or some kind of special privilege for the elite, they're missing the operational necessity here. The custody arrangement, no contact with other inmates, free access to doctors and lawyers, it's less about comfort and much more about critical security and administrative protocol. Housing a former head of state convicted of a coup in a general prison population would be an administrative nightmare, an extreme security risk. It could lead to violence or political unrest inside the facilities. The system is prioritizing stability and security, not special favor, by isolating him.
And while I do appreciate the argument for administrative necessity, the optics matter tremendously when you are trying to convince millions of people that the rule of law is equal for all citizens. How can the average citizen watching their own family members serve time in overcrowded, dangerous prisons for petty crimes reconcile that with a man convicted of trying to overthrow democracy and planned assassinations, receiving what looks like a luxury suite confinement? That contrast between the severity of the charge, attempting to destabilize the entire nation, and the comfort of his incarceration, it just further fuels the narrative among his base that the justice system operates differently for the elites. This differential treatment, regardless of its security rationale, undermines the public perception of equal justice. It lends credence to that rigged game narrative that persists across social media and opposition rallies.
I'm just not convinced that focusing solely on Bolsonaro's room undermines the entire system, especially when you consider the sheer scope of accountability that has been imposed across the entire military and political establishment involved in the coup planning. This is not selective justice targeting one man. The conviction demonstrates a widespread application of justice. 6 high-profile co-conspirators, including 4 generals, an admiral, and former ministers, have also been convicted and are serving sentences right now. High-ranking military figures like former generals Heleno, Nogueira, and Neto, and Admiral Garnier, they have been arrested and transferred to secure military bases. When the judiciary successfully jails the top echelons of a military coup attempt, including the former president, it proves its institutional strength and its capacity to hold powerful actors responsible, regardless of their rank. That evidence to me speaks louder than the size of one man's cell.
That evidence about the co-conspirators is compelling, I'll grant you, but it doesn't resolve the political consequences. You're claiming the system is strong because the verdict was delivered. I'm arguing that the democracy is weak because millions of its citizens view that very same verdict as illegitimate.
The political fallout remains the core issue here. Just look at the reaction, the deep emotional division you could see in the scenes outside the federal police building, crying loyal supporters on one side and then detractors celebrating with champagne on the other. That shows that this conviction has solidified national division. It hasn't healed it. He still represents millions of people in our country, and that emotional investment, it's not going to simply evaporate.
I'm not so convinced that this polarization will be the defining feature of the future. I would counter the idea of enduring political influence by focusing on, well, the empirical evidence of public reaction and waning support. Expert analysis suggests a clear decrease in public backing for the former president since the height of the crisis. We have concrete data. Only about 13% of voters now support Bolsonaro no matter what. And more critically, the protests outside the police headquarters have been limited to small groups, a fraction of the crowds he could mobilize just a year or two ago. The lack of mass widespread protests suggests to me that the vast majority of the public, and perhaps more importantly the critical mass of undecided voters, they accept the judicial outcome as legitimate. The institutions have done their job by neutralizing the figurehead of anti-democratic extremism.
And while I appreciate the argument about dwindling protest numbers, the depth of a loyalty that remains, even if it's only 13% who are unconditional, it's profound and politically dangerous. Furthermore, the political pressure on the institutions has not ended. The judiciary cannot operate in a political vacuum. We can't overlook the political mechanism for reversal that still exists, even after the Supreme Court has ruled. The lower house speaker, Hugo Mata, still retains the political power to potentially put an amnesty for Bolsonaro to a vote in the legislature. Now, while this action is currently considered unlikely, the mere fact that a key political figure holds the power to overturn the judiciary's decision through legislative fiat, it proves that the courts can't fully separate the legal outcome from continuous high-stakes political maneuvering. And furthermore, the threat isn't fully contained by judicial action alone. We have the example of Alexandre, the former head of the intelligence agency, a key co-conspirator. He fled Brazil for the U.S. to avoid serving his 16-year sentence. This demonstrates that anti-democratic actors are still actively challenging the judiciary's authority and are willing to use transnational tactics to evade accountability. That proves the political fight is far from over.
The fact remains, however, that one of the most powerful men in the country who organized a coup attempt is now behind bars. Brazil's institutions have proven their ultimate defense capability. The irreversible precedent of a 27-year sentence, affirmed by the Supreme Court after exhausting every single avenue of appeal, ensures accountability at the highest level of government. While political polarization may persist, the successful enforcement of this sentence against an individual who tried to dismantle the democratic framework that fundamentally secures the rule of law for the future.
My conclusion is that while the courts have, yes, technically succeeded in achieving a conviction and incarceration, the political narrative surrounding the case, which is entrenched as a rigged game by millions of citizens and backed by the emotional loyalty of his base, will persist, and it will challenge the stability of Brazilian democracy for years to come. The enduring presence of powerful political mechanisms like the threat of amnesty, combined with the successful flight of high-level co-conspirators, demonstrates that the threat of anti-democratic sentiment is a deep political challenge that judicial action, no matter how rigorous, cannot fully contain on its own.
It's clear that the source material reveals a fundamental and a very difficult tension between the necessity of robust legal action to prosecute a coup attempt and the profound difficulty of achieving genuine national consensus in a deeply polarized environment. And this tension, I think, between judicial necessity and political legitimacy will continue to be the defining feature of Brazilian governance moving forward.